Now I'll introduce Dr. Monique Ryan MP, became the 8th Kooyong representative and first woman to represent the people of Kooyong. Exactly 1 year, 1 month and 1 week ago. In her first speech to Parliament 1 year ago, she referred to climate change as the greatest challenge of our generation. So what are the insights? What are the challenges for Monique in Canberra and here in Kooyong? And how can we work together to achieve decarbonisation as well as a just Australia and a Commonwealth? Please welcome Monique to the microphone.
I would also like to start by acknowledging the fact that we stand or sit on ground today, which was never ceded to us, and acknowledge the traditional owners, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and say that I hope that later this year we'll give those people a voice. Seeing lots of friends out there. Good to see. Thank you all for coming on a cold winter night. As many of you know, in about October 2021, Kooyong Independence put an ad in the paper which said, "Are you the next independent candidate for Kooyong?" And that was something that I saw and sort of put away, and then a friend texted me and said, "Mon, have you seen this?" And I said, "Well, yes, I have." And, 5 minutes later, I'd sort of snuck off to the study at home and started to put in an application to Kooyong Independence. Many times subsequently I've asked myself why I did that. The reality was that I was, like many people, and I'm sure like many of you here tonight, deeply, deeply, viscerally frustrated with our previous government. And I've said to a few people, the Teals, none of us would be here today had Bill Shorten won the 2019 election. We wouldn't be here if Julie Bishop had become leader of the Liberal Party instead of Scott Morrison. There's many sliding doors in Australian political history in the last 5, 10, 15 years which have led to the community independence and what happened with the 2022 election. But for me, it was climate change. It was my 15-year-old, now 15-year-old, then 13-year-old son's distress on watching David Attenborough, Life on Earth shows. It was increasing frustration with a government that didn't represent me and a government of which I was embarrassed. When Scott Morrison went to the COP in Glasgow, fossil fuel peoples exhibiting at the COP, it was a national embarrassment when he didn't know how to deal with the fact that a woman fairly convincingly alleged that she'd been sexually assaulted in Parliament House and had to be told by his wife to think about it in terms of if it was his daughter. That showed a level of what I thought was emotional infantilism that was embarrassing for us as a country. It wasn't a government that reflected me, and so I felt I had to do something. I just couldn't cope with it anymore. And there were so many of us who were planning to move to New Zealand after this May 22 election. There wasn't change. I think that the 2019 election, I expected fully that there would be a change of government and things would get better. And then when that didn't, I think many of us realised that something had to be done and people had to take it into their own hands. So, I put my hand up, I went and interviewed. Many of you will know this story, some of you are involved in it. I didn't expect to be chosen to be the independent candidate for Kooyong, and then when I was chosen, I didn't expect to win. And in fact, when I went to talk to my boss at the Royal Children's Hospital, she told me it was a vanity project. To resign my job, I lost all of my sick leave, I lost my long service leave, I lost all the seniority I had in my position, and I lost 6 months' pay or 8 months' pay when I did what I did. So I didn't really see it as a vanity project. But I didn't expect to be elected. I didn't, not until PM on May the 21st, 2022. And I've said to many people since, when I put my hand up to do that, and when Zoe put her hand up to do it in Goldstein, and Sophie and McKellar and Allegra in Wentworth and Kate in Curtin and Kylie in North Sydney, there was no such thing as a teal. Each of us did it within our own communities for our own reasons, which were pretty similar reasons in the end. But it wasn't part of a movement, or it wasn't part of a force for change. It became that, but it wasn't that initially. And as it sort of became that in the middle of last year, that was a kind of strange experience. May 21st, 2022, I and a number of other community independents were elected to Parliament. And then we had to work out what to do. It has been an extraordinary adventure and an amazing journey. I think it's only just started. Many people after the election said to us, look, you haven't got the balance of power. What are you going to do? You know, you've got no power. And I can speak for the others because we've talked about this endlessly. To some extent, we were concerned that that was the case, that we wouldn't be able to change much. Ability to affect change in Canberra would be limited. In fact, quite early on, a journalist said to me, look, you know, the Liberal Party think you'll be gone in 3 years' time because you'll find that you can't do anything and you're used to being in a position where in your job you can make decisions and things happen, and that won't be the case in Canberra. And I was surprised by that, but I sort of thought, well, I don't know, maybe it will be. And then we started to sort of exercise our powers, and we started to understand what we can do. I actually had a glimpse of what we could do before the election on the 19th of May last year. I was saying to the team that I'd had a distressing experience at the pre-poll where a lady had come up to me in tears because her husband wasn't going to be able to vote because he'd just tested positive for COVID. And the rules were that if you tested positive within 72 hours of the election, you weren't going to be able to vote. And he was really distressed. And she asked me if I could help. So I asked her who he was going to vote for. Not really. No, so I went back to the office and I said to her, that's really bad, you know, this is terrible. And someone said, well, that's really appalling. And then we realised that other people were calling us, can you help? And there were emails coming through saying, I'm really distressed about this. And we thought, well, if it comes down to 50 votes or 100 votes and people haven't been able to vote and then they protest that, this is ugly. And that could happen in every electorate in Australia. And then things being things, and the people of the Kooyong campaign being who they are, that snowballed within about 3 hours to us having built a go-to site for people to donate money. We'd spoken to some constitutional lawyers in Sydney and asked them if they would mount a federal court challenge to it. And we basically announced that we were going to challenge this situation in the federal court if it couldn't be remediated. But within about 3 hours on this one pizza night, we got the constitutional lawyers involved and we prepared ourselves to mount a federal court challenge to it. And at about 9:30 on the Thursday night, we hit go and we set out social media alerts to people telling them we were going to do this. And within 2 hours, we'd collected $120,000. And the next day, Alex Hawke changed the law, which was extraordinary. You know, we were standing at pre-poll on the Friday saying, if we could do this before we're even elected, what could we do after? It gave us a real sense of possibility. And so I guess after the election, what has happened? Well, during the election campaign, there was a whole lot of, what's your target for 2030? What's your target? In the end, the Albanese government had the balance of power and they could enact the Climate Change Act, as you know, which has a 43% target for 2030. And so they have done that. But they brought to us a bill which was okay, but it wasn't great. And so I and a number of other independents moved amendments to it, which they didn't accept, but some of them got up in the Senate. But the next big piece of legislation that came up was this year the safeguards mechanism, and that also was okay, but not great. But with that, we had the beauty of the fact that this was a piece of legislation which the Liberal Party had come up with and not passed. Then, as is now their wont, the Labor Party picked up and ran with, and the Liberal Party said, no, even though it was their own legislation, said no, which actually gave us the opportunity to have an effect on it, because if they'd said yes, it would have gone straight through. It would have sailed through Parliament and there wouldn't have been any need to debate it or improve it. But because the Liberal Party, in their wisdom, said no, it meant that we got to debate it, put in a huge number of amendments. Some of them got up in the House and some of them got up in the Senate. It wasn't perfect. No, it's far from perfect, but it was better. And exactly the same thing happened last week with the nature repair market. And what we've learned is that that is our role at this point in time, is to act as the sensible centrists, the pragmatists who will actually come to the table and debate bills with the government in a way that the opposition is not doing. They've actually left a space for us to waltz into, and we have waltzed into it with great gusto, both in the House but also in the Senate as well. And essentially our role has become the role of Australian Democrats, that we are keeping the bastards honest. And what we've learned is that even if you don't have the balance of power, you can change things. Someone said to me, when you're in government, you have power. When you're in opposition, you wield pressure. And what we've realised, for whatever reason, is that the crossbench in this parliament, we can exert more pressure than in some ways justifiable. For some reason, the Teals in particular get a lot of press. We get a lot of coverage. We get more attention than we should. It really annoys the Labor backbenchers and the Liberal backbenchers. They can't work out why we get briefings with the ministers on every new bill when they don't. It's really remarkable. I'm not sure why it is, but for some reason it's there and we've chosen to use it, because when you're in opposition, you have to use what you can. And for me, I guess that has been part of the learning process. I started probably with a bit of imposter syndrome as a politician, because I didn't know how legislation worked. I didn't know how the House worked. And I probably, in the first few months, struggled with the fact that I was in a role previously where I was very experienced, a position of comfort, now in a position of great discomfort at times. You know, you realise that there are levers that you can pull. Actually, in my second week, the Governor-General had received a whole lot of money from Scott Morrison, a really dodgy grant to that leadership fund. We were trying to work out how we could stop that, and we worked out that there's this thing called delegated legislation, and if something's been before the House for 10 sitting days or fewer, you can stop it. And we did that. And you could just see people go, what? You know. And we thought, well, that was fun. What else can we stop? And we are only just, and when I say we, I mean I and all the other independents, working out how to work with each other, how to cover all the areas that we need to cover effectively and efficiently, while giving each other space to get some wins. But we're also working out where to go to from here. And it's really hard, because it's only 3 years is actually a very brief time, and in fact the next election could be as early as August of next year, which is not a long time at all if you have to campaign for 6 months before. It's a very strange existence to constantly be thinking about what happens next time and to looking over your shoulder to see, you know, who's coming at you. It's a strange life. But on the very first day, the Prime Minister said to us, no one is here for as long as they want to be. And I think I certainly have taken that to heart. Also, what Paul Keating said to Julia Gillard the day she was deposed as leader, which is that love everyone leaves here in a box. So I have found the role incredibly engaging, incredibly interesting. I think we're only just beginning to work out what we can do. So we've had the Climate Change Act, we've had the Safeguards Act and the Nature Repair Market. The next 6 to 12 months, the very, very big piece is the EPPC Act, which is massive. We'll start to see drafts of pieces of legislation for that in the next few months, but we probably won't debate it till next year, but it will take ages. And that's massive. That's your water trigger, that's protection of species. There's actually protection of heritage buildings as well, strangely enough. It's a whole lot of different things that will come under this one massive, massive bill, which I think for this government will be defining in terms of their climate record, because so far everything's been a little bit less good than what we hoped for. And my job, and the job of the other independents, is to try and improve it, to make a case and to build the expertise and to build the team that, if we do have the balance of power after the next election, will really up the ante. Because what we've seen is that this government, although it has some really good things to do and it's got good intentions, is hampered for whatever reason in what it's putting on the table in terms of legislation. And so what we're doing now is kind of just the beginning.
Thank you, Monique. The honesty there, and there's a little bit of humour along the way, but the honesty there is massive, and I think the integrity is really shining through everywhere when it comes to community independence. All right, now we're going to move into the part of the evening, which is a conversation with Susan here and Monique. So I'll hand over. Thank you.
Balance what you're thinking about in Canberra with what you're thinking about for all of us here. Of course, part of that is, what you're doing in Canberra is for us, but there's also things that are relevant here. That
is actually one of the more difficult things, which is the fact that you spend a third of your time in Canberra, which is like another world because you are really in an incredible bubble. I'm renting an apartment with a couple of the other independents, which is literally across the road from Parliament House. I can walk out my door across the road and be in Parliament House within 2 minutes. And during those days, you'll start with a breakfast, but it's often 3 breakfasts. You might be a couple of health groups or a disability group or First Nations group or a climate group, and you might go to 2 or 3 different breakfasts, and then you do this, then you go to briefing, then you do this, and you go to the house, and then I literally run from things. You go see a school, go here, go here. It's really frenetic, and you do get home at about 8:30 or 9 and you're wired. At the end of the first year, we had a dinner for all the first timers, and we did some online thing where you put in 3 words to summarise your year, and you get that word cloud thing. And the biggest word was 6 kilograms because that's how much we've all gained.
Well, it's funny because when you were first talking, I was about to say, oh, it doesn't sound like you'd have much time to eat, but actually it sounds like you spend a lot of time at breakfast and at dinners.
You get to about 3 o'clock and then you go, so it's really frenetic and it's full on and it's incredibly intense. It's so interesting. There's so much to learn. And you might look at 5 or 6 different pieces of legislation in a week. I had never read a piece of legislation in my life before last July. So learning curve's been like that. I have 2 staff members there now. Spend 14 hours a day with them. You travel with them. You eat with them. It's really intense. But it's not the real world. You come back to Kooyong, and in fact, Kooyong is the reason why I'm here. Part of the reason I think I was elected was because I care about the community. I want to be in the community. So today I went to 4 events. And for me, actually, the biggest challenge is not the Canberra bit, because I'm getting my head around that. I can read legislation now. I can see where I've got an in and where I don't. I'm beginning to write speeches much more quickly than I did initially. But the things that I'm struggling with are how to get a bike trail, from Hawthorn to Rock Hill.
So let's start. That's a bit close to the bone, that one.
Yeah, well, how to get things done in the community, how to get the EV chargers. Do we want a community battery? And if so, how to do it and where to put it and how to facilitate that? Because the stuff I can do for myself, I can do, but working with council and with the state government is really challenging. What I have learned that is a huge amount of politics is getting to know people and having personal relations, and I've got those now. I'm getting those in Canberra, but I don't have it so much with the state government at all, actually. They haven't been particularly open or interested, let's face it. And working with council, it can be challenging as well.
Yeah. It can.
Yeah.
That's right.
Not in a negative way, but it's really hard, especially
different.
when you're not physically not even here a third of the time as well. Yeah. But getting to know people and getting to understand how things work is not something that you can work out in the first 6 months.
No, that's right. And the different levels of government work differently. And those overlapping circles can be a positive thing, but not always. Not always, that's right. So I know people are itching to talk a bit about climate, and you did mention the safeguard mechanism. Even though it was not perfect, it looked like it worked pretty well. Like things happened in the way that we might want them to happen. Can you talk to us a bit about this? Did it work well? Did the Greens and Labor work together well? Was it a good process? Can you talk about that?
No, I can. Yeah. So the first thing I discovered, which I actually didn't know before I got to Canberra, was that the Greens and Labor really hate each other. Really hate each other. But then sometimes you wonder how much of it is performative. Some of it is definitely performative. Some of it is visceral. So there is something there. Most of us are, I think, relatively pragmatic, but often you find that there's a bit of brinkmanship about, people saying, no. Oh, fine. And there's quite a lot of that. And then there's the whole political thing of who's going to take credit for things. Because, of course, success has many fathers. Anytime anything goes through, we all claim credit for it. For those of us who have a strong bullshit meter, that's actually problematic because they're like, well, we didn't actually do that, did we? Oh, we did. Oh, great. The Greens and Labor are really, it's an interesting conundrum. The fraction lines there and the old resentments and things like that are really interesting to see as an outsider. In the end, it probably improves things. But sometimes it's hard to know how much of it is real and how much of it is smoke and mirrors.
Do you think that the Greens are working effectively then for climate overall?
Yes, I do. No, I definitely do. I do. Yeah, they're always under that pressure where if anyone uses the phrase perfect being the enemy of good, the Greens start twitching, which can be quite helpful actually when you want to put the wind up them. No, it's very important to have them there, and I think it's really important to have the community independence there, because if it were not for us, things would just be going straight through. We call bullshit on things. At least we're calling it. I mean, someone has to say. One of the hard things is voting for things that you know are rubbish, and that could be and should be much, much better than they are, because the alternative is not voting for them. It's actually the challenge. I almost didn't vote for the nature repair market bill last week because I think it's really rubbish. I think it's really deeply problematic. There's a real risk of setting up a rubbish offset market. We have assurances that once everything's put in place and the EPPC Act review comes through, that the nature repair market hopefully will work. But there's a little bit of trust there, and I think at some point we might actually say no. I mean, that went through, and then the next day Tanya Plibersek she floated her new sea dumping bill, which just made me just have a chest pain, which is about giving permission for Santos essentially to take gas from the Barossa, take it to Timor-Leste and do carbon capture and storage there. It's just... You just look at it on the face of it, think, how could you think that that is reasonable or justifiable? I could not vote for that tomorrow, but I did vote for the nature repair market, but I'm a bit conflicted about it. It's not always easy when you see things which are so far from where they could be.
Absolutely, and I think that for the public, it can be really hard to see, even at our level, even at council, it can be really hard to see that why someone votes a certain way on something, because there's often complexity behind it, and that complexity is not necessarily just you're sort of selling out for something else, but it can be about saying, well, I feel like I've pushed as hard. It sounds like you're saying we've pushed as hard as we could go, and the choice then is between what I've got here or nothing, and it might not get any better, right? And you can be criticized either way. That's right. But I do know that people might be feeling a bit of a sense of sort of what I referred to in the beginning of that we're a year in, and where's the big phenomenal change? We're obviously in the middle of a climate crisis. We don't have a year to kill. We don't have a year to waste. I'm not saying the whole year's been wasted, but maybe not as much progress as some people hoped. Why Labour believe and agree to the science of climate change, why they're still suggesting that new fossil fuel plants, they're not ready to say, no, we're done, we're cutting it, we're stopping now. Do you have any thoughts on why that is?
There's a great insecurity because we get so much negativity about, the transition, and opposition is so consistent in pushing back about these things. I mean, it's remarkable how they've rediscovered the potential of nuclear, which they usually pronounce nuclear, the potential for the transition to be non-seamless is really worrisome for people. But I actually think it's jobs, and I think it's I do think that lobbying groups and the money that fossil fuel companies give to the major parties influences their decision making. I do,
Well, that actually, there's a lot of nodding, and yes, and that was actually a question that I wanted to ask you: is have you seen that kind of influence in Canberra in a way, in terms of fossil fuel companies influencing the decisions that are made?
Oh, look, I think they're all pretty good at hiding it. But if you look at the donations to the major political parties last year, massive amount of the donations to the parties were really significant to the Labor Party as well as the Liberal Party. And we're talking IPIA, we're talking Santos, we're talking Woodside, we're talking the Minerals Council. There's money on the table there. And that's just the stuff you know about. And I suspect that that's the tip of the iceberg. We're giving money to companies like the government, when it gave $1.9 billion to Middle Arm in the October budget last year to set up the Middle Arm petrochemicals facility in Darwin Harbour, essentially was putting money into infrastructure for what is a developed technology, gas, to be processed and shipped offshore. That's an active subsidy to new fossil fuel activities. There's heaps of that going on, and I don't think we even see the half of it. And I don't see the lobbying, but I know it's happening because you can see it affecting the decisions that are being made.
Yeah. Right, I think there are going to be more questions coming up about that in a minute, but I I want to talk briefly about EVs. Obviously, worldwide, the trend is fantastic. In Australia, it's in the right direction, but a lot slower, probably. I think 3.8% or something of new car sales in Australia, which is not representative of this room, probably, because most people in this room, we would think that that number was a lot higher based on the people that we know who have EVs, but the reality is it's not.
No.
So do you have any thoughts about what's going on and how do we speed up that?
I think there's lots of levers that are going to be pulled on that. So the fuel efficiency standards are coming. There's a whole lot of little levers that are being pulled. Uber has, committed to going all electric by end of 2025, I think. The Commonwealth fleets are all going over to electric, which will improve the second-hand market. There will be more action in terms of dropping things like the luxury car tax discount, which I pushed for last year. I'm hoping the government will move more to also subsidising other forms of active transport, like bikes. Makes perfect sense. We've talked about that, putting up a private member's bill for that. I think there's lots of little levers which will be pulled on that, but it's coming, but it's much more slowly than people would like.
Didn't you tell me you're convener of the Friends of EV?
I'm convener of the Parliamentary Friends of Electric Vehicles, which is funny because I drive a 12-year-old Golf and my husband drives a 23-year-old Subaru.
Temporarily.
Temporarily, yeah. We're on the list for about 3 different EVs, but, as you all know, there's a massive wait for them. And let's face it, affordability is a real problem still. Unless we make them affordable to most people, the luxury sort of market is out of most people's reach. So we need to make it's the BDEs and the cheaper ones that we need to get into the country. But we're being told that there are massive supply chains with that. But I think with fuel efficiency standards, I think we'll get there. But as you say, everything's 30% or more slower than you think it would be reasonable. I think that's probably what politics is like.
Okay, I'm going to ask one more and then I'll turn to your questions. And that is this idea about influence. I mean, I think the reason most of us got involved with lighter footprints is because we wanted to influence change, right? We wanted to make a difference. And so a year in, how do you think the community best influences change in Canberra anyway? What are the most effective things that people can do, either individuals or groups like Lighter Footprints?
As an independent, I have the ability to decide what I want to do. And I know that really annoys my backbench colleagues in the parties because I can actually say what I want and do what I like, which is really fantastic. The problem is that so many people come to me every single day with things that I need to do. You should do this, you should do that, you need to do this when we want you to do that, which is great, but you can't possibly do everything. I've been really lucky and I've been very reliant on people giving me their knowledge and their expertise. And I've learned from Cathy McGowan, who said, don't just take that, people coming to you and saying, this is what you need to do, then say to them, great, how are you going to help me do that? And so with Lighter Footprints, we have a meeting where we go through all the different areas, and where I can, I offload work to people. It's become very clear to me that that's something that I have to do, otherwise I can't get anything finished. It's taken me 12 months, but I've now got to the point where I know who to call if I need to talk about what is the reasonable, where to put a gas cap. I've got Rod Sims' number now. People have been incredibly generous with their knowledge and their expertise, I think because they know that the independents are well-meaning and potentially in a position to affect change. But we need support. If people want to change something, if they feel really passionate about it, they should come and talk to me, but they can't just come to me and say, this is a problem and you need to fix it. They need to come to me and say, this is a problem and this is how you should fix it and this is what needs to be done. We've done that on native forest logging. We talked about native forest logging. It seemed a bit, we're never going to make a change. We talked about it in the team. We went to see the native forests. Clearly it was a change. I went with Michelle and Nandaraja from Higgins. She got told off for coming with me. I came back and talked to people in the team. We made a lot of noise about it. When Dan Andrews decided to, in Victoria, I took credit for that. I'm learning. As a team, we've actually come up this week with the private members' bill to stop native forest logging nationally. It won't get up. It won't get up. I will take it to Parliament and I will argue for it and I'll make a fuss and other people will support it and debate it and the Greens will support it and it won't get up. But each time you do that, you realise that you are ratcheting up the pressure and you are making a change and you're bringing it to people's consciousness. And that's what happened with the ICAC, National Integrity Commission. There was a number of iterations of that were brought to Parliament. Same with marriage equality. I think it was 19 times before it got through. You know, you realise that is the stuff, and you think, oh, is there any point? It's not going to get up. I can't get this passed. But actually, you can ratchet up the pressure, and that's the power of the crossbench. Yeah. But we need help, and I've got experts helping me with the information I need, but also to draft the legislation and to do all those other things as well.
So what's your attitude to approval of major new fossil fuel projects, and why is Albo's ALP government doing it? I think you sort of answered the second half of it.
Yeah, I mean, we can't have new fossil fuel. We can't have new gas or coal if we're going to avoid 1.5. I don't know if we're going to avoid 1.5. I don't know that we are. We probably aren't, actually, but we probably go to 1.6 and then hopefully get it back down again. No, we can't have it. It's clear. The frustrating thing is the government knows that. You know, Tanya and Chris know that better than I do. And yet they look you in the eye and they go, oh, that's not going to happen. Oh, no, it is. That's the frustrating thing. And sometimes you just can't work out why they won't affect the change that they need to affect. Often there's other things that you don't know. There's other pressures, there's other issues, there's the unions, or there's this, or there's this, or there's this. It's not that they don't know, it's just that for whatever reason they won't go there until they're forced to almost. And that's what we kind of have to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the gas lobby and it's everything else.
So this one, again, is worth thanking you, because they did thank you for your work showing the importance of our Victorian native forests. And you have talked about the private members bill, but federally, how are there other ways maybe that you can influence to protect our precious biodiversity? And you did mention the EPBC. I don't know if you want to talk about that again.
Yeah, so the EPBC Act is coming. There's also the TNFD Act. There's about...
Which is?
Oh, I can't remember.
Somebody can Google it and tell us.
There's a whole lot of different things which are coming, which are sort of difficult, complex things about equivalency and biodiversity. We're looking at the EPBC Act already and what to do there. One of the things is we've realised that we can't all do everything. We do meet and we talk about who's doing what. For me at the moment, it's Middle Arm, Beetaloo, native forest logging and seismic testing and sort of the marine conservation stuff. And that's where I'll be sort of putting my sort of focus of activity.
Do we need the Beetaloo gas and Middle Arm in NT? This person says they're from Ballarat, and I'm meeting with Catherine King from Ballarat next week. What should I ask of her?
Do we need them?
Do we need Beetaloo and Middle Arm?
No. Mm-hmm. No, we don't. So Beetaloo is frightening. Somewhere between 1,000 and 6,000 fracking wells in the Northern Territory. Which the gas from which will go to Middle Arm and then be exported. The frightening things about that fracking are what they'll do to the aquifers of the Northern Territory, which run south to north. So there's a real danger of pollution, significant pollution, and then loss of water supply to large parts of the territory, and then the direct and indirect effects of the fracking itself. The First Nations people don't want that. I'm working with a group of paediatricians from the Northern Territory. We're going to have a day of action in Canberra on the 8th of August, and the paediatricians are coming, the First Nations people are coming, other sorts of health professionals are coming. We're trying to get hundreds and hundreds of people into the house to just say this, it has to stop. It's quite apart from anything. So Middle Arm, which is this petrochemical processing factory on the Middle Arm of Darwin Harbour, there's 3 arms, is 3 k's away from Palmerston, which is a suburb of 30,000 people. Catherine King and Madeline King both keep denying that it's a gas processing facility. All of the initial paperwork said gas processing, and now they've changed it to sustainable precinct. It's just like they've just done a find and replace thing, which is just deeply, deeply annoying. Catherine King just turns and runs when she sees me coming at her, because I'm like, it's just so infuriating. The idea of having a petrochemical hub processing, they're going to produce hydrogen there, 3 k's from Palmerston. It's like an accident could be disastrous, quite apart from what it will do to Darwin Harbour and what it will do to the water supplies of the Northern Territory. I just get furious even thinking about it. It has to be stopped.
So to his second half of the question then,
yeah,
what's a good question for him to ask? What do you ask her when she runs away from you? What are you wanting to ask her?
Well, I keep asking her the same question and she keeps giving me different answers. But eventually, I kept saying it's a gas process, it's a new fossil fuel development. She said, no, it's not. The territory needs jobs. which is probably...
So it is.
Yeah, it's jobs. Yes. And so I think that the way to shame Madeline and Catherine into... Madeline's the Minister for Minerals, but also for the Northern Territory, is just to keep holding them to the fact. They said it's not fossil fuel, it's not fossil fuel, it's not fossil fuel, and then 2 weeks ago Tamboran, which is the company that's got the major shareholding in Beetaloo, announced, great, we've got this new gas processing facility at Middle Arm. The double think is just deeply, deeply frustrating, and I'm new to this. I'm not used to this sort of... Yes, that's true.
What more should Burundara Council be doing regarding climate change? Think globally, act locally. Can we lead the way? Thoughts? I think it's a question for me. One of the issues when we voted in a climate emergency a couple of years ago, and then when we launched our climate action, was one of the concerns or differences of views on the council was whether or not we really had a role as a council in thinking about community missions. But you can do the maths very quickly and see that, you know, the majority, as in 97% of the emissions that come in our community are from all of us as individuals, not the council itself, right? So the view was, well, maybe we need to focus on our own space, but our own space is pretty easy to get a hold of, and we're doing pretty well on that in terms of really we've made some good steps in council itself, but the real challenge obviously is about how do we, as in all of us, bring around all of our neighbours and everybody in our community to change the way we live. Luckily, what we know now, and those who've been reading Saul Griffiths, for instance, is that it's not what we used to think, which is that we can't have fun, can't have a weekend, can't have a car, can't heat our houses. We can do those things, but we just need to electrify them. We just need to do it differently. So it's not to say that it means living in a tent. That's the real piece that we're moving into, and certainly through Electrify Burundara, which many of you would have heard of. It's not a council activity, but it's something we support effectively, involved in the alliance, very much supporting this alliance. And I think that is the way that we as a council will begin to do more and more, because we have a real opportunity to educate people. We put something in your letterbox 10 times a year, and there are ways of informing people. So in my ward newsletter, for instance, Carolyn helped me actually find a resident from Hawthorne who had just electrified their home or in the process of doing it. This is about role modeling, but also through our climate action plan, we're actually really starting to do very concrete education actions, or even more than education, helping people to supplement the cost, for instance, of if we're talking about solar panels, or certainly educating people how to buy solar panels. How do we make some of these changes? Then we need to think about things like, how do we help people who live in multi-unit developments to be able to charge their EVs when they don't have off-street parking? How do you get an EV? And how do you charge it?
So there's lots of pieces to the puzzle. Most of us who'd like to electrify a home are daunted by the complexity or the cost, I think. And at the moment, difficulty of getting tradies. It's not a small cost to do it, but most of us will feel better when we do it. We know that. And the complexity is me working out how I can help, and you guys helping how to do it on the streets of Burundara. Yeah. But I think the Electrify Burundara initiative, you know, we've done really well in getting it. I'm seeing lots of people from Electrify Burundara here. These things aren't easy to start and to get going, but once they do, they'll have their own impetus.
Especially to have it be across political lines, right?
Yeah.
Across party lines, sitting in there with people from Labour and Liberals, and we've got someone from John Pizzuto's office and people from Matt Freegan's office, and it's great. Obviously, Mon's team, very supportive. How do we separate big business, especially the fossil fuel industry, from the major political parties without donation caps? We haven't talked about donation caps yet tonight.
We need to have donation reform in Australia, and I don't know if many of you saw that the interim report of the Joint Standing Committee into Electoral Matters, the JSCM, came out last week. The final report's expected in probably October, and there were a number of recommendations out of that, which included things like a cap on spending and a cap on donations in federal elections, both of which are a great idea, except there's a real risk that they will disadvantage small parties and independents. And the reasons for that are a little bit complicated, but you can probably take it on spec that major parties would be very happy to make changes to electoral rules that benefit them and disadvantage people like me and like the Greens. they will always be happy to do that, whereas they will be unhappy to do things that disadvantage them. So when they say they think electoral donation caps and spending caps are a great idea, you have to begin to wonder what might be behind that. There's some low-hanging fruit, which I think is really, really important, and that the independents have absolutely no problem with, in fact, that we have been pushing for. One of them is truth in political advertising, because I still can't quite believe that you can lie outright in a political ad. And I'm still getting over the things that were said about me on election day. Remarkable. The fact that you can say anything you like in a political ad is extraordinary.
It is.
So that's got to go. And real-time donation transparency around that, absolutely fine. But the reality is that the Liberal Party has something called the Cormac Foundation, which has a corpus of $100 million in it. And it took $7 million out of that for the election last year and didn't make a dent in it because of its interest. And then the Labor Party has all these different holdings, plus the unions, plus they have these private groups where you pay $30,000 to be a member of Labor business, and you get to have attend a dinner hosted by PwC on budget night.
Maybe not by PwC next time.
Oh, I'm not joking. There was going to be a dinner for Labor Party business club members hosted by PwC after the budget this year, and it stopped because people like me said, you've got to be joking. And that was while the whole PwC thing was beginning to come to light. But they have all these private clubs, and Josh had $3.5 million from Kooyong 200 that he'd accrued in the 3 years before the 2022 election, not a penny of which he'd had to declare because those means of donations didn't have to be declared. So if those things are still in place and you've still got these private ways of pushing money through to the political parties, whereas people like me are being utterly transparent about everything, and with a donation cap of $3,000, $4,000, you'll get what you had in the New South Wales and Victorian state elections, which is that independents will not be elected.
Yeah.
And that would be just fine for the Liberals and the Labors, but it might not be just fine for everybody. So we need reform, no doubt about it. The trick is not throwing the babies out with the bathwater.
Yeah. One of the things we haven't really talked about specifically, areas of integrity that you think have been encouraging or surprising this year, discouraging?
Look, I don't know about everyone else, but I just think that every week, sometimes twice a week, there's more and more evidence of how corrupt the Morrison government was. And I'm not saying that just to bury the boot into my predecessor. It's apparent. Today was the fact that the building program that they've set up, the government set up in 2019, 2020, it decreased housing affordability, it decreased housing availability, and it disadvantaged builders. It put builders out of work, and there was a PwC report in 2020 that said it was working beautifully. Because contractors, if you get external contractors to come in, they'll always tell you what you want to hear. 2 weeks ago, there was the Community Hospital and Health Program, which showed that 2 out of 171 programs that was approved by the Health Department in this particular grants round met criteria, and that the Health Department acted unethically and unlawfully were the words that the Audit Office used in allowing those grants to go ahead. But it did because it's kind of captured and because the external contractors thought it was a good idea. If you call corruption the use of public money for personal or political gain, the extent of the corruption that's becoming apparent is frightening, and we haven't even talked about robo-debt or other ways in which the system's been subverted. And so the integrity piece is really important. So we'll have a National Anti-Corruption Commission as of the 1st of July, which I think is Saturday, and the Attorney-General tells me that he's expecting like a flood of phone calls at 8 a.m. on the 3rd. But that's just part of it. Then we need reform of things like our lobbying rules, and we need donation reform, and we need a whole other raft of integrity measures, and the crossbench are working on those.
It just shows really how integrity is so integral to a decent political system, really.
Yeah, but we've been like frogs. We've sort of been slowly boiled and not realised that the water was getting hotter.
So I have another question about what's your relationship like with the Greens?
Oh, look, it's pretty good. I mean, I'm a pragmatist. So I've got a good relationship with most people. The Liberals don't seem to like me. I'm not sure. No, I like the Greens. It's interesting. They're politicians. Adam in particular is an experienced politician, and they're an interesting group of people. So we work together well with them, and we're all very, civil and respectful of each other. But we don't work closely together on, for example, developing policy and things like that. They don't want to do that with us. Whereas the independents we don't work together, but we don't want to step on each other's toes and duplicate things unnecessarily. So we do get together and say, well, I'm working on a piece on lobbying. Sophie's working on a piece on junk food advertising. Zoe's working on a piece on gambling reform. I'm not going to go there because she's going there. It wouldn't make any sense. So we do that together. But the Greens aren't always as forthcoming about what they're doing.
And part of that, it sounds like, is pragmatism in the sense that you are limited in your staffing, as we know, right? Meaning you've got to work together in that sense if you have a similar view on something, I presume.
Absolutely, yeah. I think that the crossbench, we're all pretty much supportive of each other, but we don't always vote in the same way, and we don't think about the same things in the same way either. And that's kind of interesting. And, there are times where we've gone in different directions, even on each other's bills. And that's a challenge. But, everyone's been very respectful and supportive of each other throughout.
I mean, you're not a party.
We're not a party.
Not a party, so it makes sense that you don't vote in the same way necessarily, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. We've got a question about recycling. Recycling in Australia is a schmozzle at the moment. Is there any chance of some progress?
Yeah, there is some stuff coming. It's really, I completely agree, it's completely appalling, the soft plastics in particular. There is some stuff coming with some new facilities that will be able to markedly increase our ability to recycle soft plastics in the next 6 to 12 months, but it takes some time to build them. In the meantime, there have been some shipments of soft plastics overseas, which is, really deeply problematic on a number of levels, but it's not a short-term answer. And there have been also, I've been part of a number of conversations about how we package things and how they're presented to the public and what the cost of that is, and how the cost of that the cost of the items that we buy should reflect the cost of dealing with the packaging that they come in. And that's being thought about as well, but it's not necessarily a simple thing to do always. Council itself is looking at a short-term stopgap for the soft plastics, because I think there is a view that the soft plastics will get back on its feet in the next 18 months or so, working with a company not to sort of end up with lots of storehouses full of soft plastics, but a company that's interested in using them for, I think they melt it down, use it, then make furniture or something. So we need to find ways of helping people. To consolidate your efforts beyond the next election, will you eventually form a teal party to have more impact? I can't see it happening, actually. We've talked about it. It's an interesting one, but no, I just can't see it happening because we actually believe different things. And we go in different ways on different issues. And we all have our own pressures in our own electorates. We have really quite different electorates. People sort of think that they're all sort of wealthy, well-educated electorates, and that all the teals are sort of cut from the same cloth, but that's actually not true. And sometimes we find ourselves rubbing up against each other on specific issues. One of them is the change to prescription rules that came through in the last budget, which I'd pushed for in the first half of this year, where you can get a 12-month prescription rather than a 6-month prescription on medications that you've been on for some time if you're on a stable dose and your GP thinks it's safe to do so. And the benefit of that is you have to get half as many prescriptions from your GPs, fewer visits to your GP, but also dispensing fees are decreased by, basically it's $180 per medication per year for those medications for which it fits. And so for some people that's a significant saving, and I think that's a great idea. But Kylie Tink has a lot of pharmacies and pharmaceutical sort of companies in her electorate, and she thinks it's a really bad idea. That's probably going to come to the crux in the next couple of weeks. And even though a lot of pharmacists are very cross with me about this because it's going to really cut into their income, I think it's a good piece of policy and I'll support it. I don't think she will. That's just one example. There's lots of different things. You know, the IR reform that came through last year, stage 3 tax cuts, changes to super, those sorts of things we do tend to go in different ways. There's also quite a big undertaking, I understand, to set up a political party, and I just can't see it happening. It's also really fun being an independent.
Because?
Because no one gets to tell you what to do.
You have to think about every
You do,
bill.
and you have to work harder. And there's been a few people on backbenchers on either side who sort of said, you guys seem to be having a lot of fun. I'd like to join you. We go, well, you have to read every piece of legislation. They go, oh. But being told what to do, you know, and having to vote against my conscience is something that I'm just too old and too ugly to even think about. I just couldn't do it. That's not why I'm there.
Absolutely, but I think that the independents themselves are just challenging what we have understood of politics, which is a two-party system. We really
Australia
want to
has never
replace
had a
it.
two-party system. It never has. From Federation, we had 3 parties. You know, Sky said this to me the other day. They said, you killed the two-party system. I was like, what two-party system? The Liberal Party wouldn't have held government without the National Party since, what, the 1950s or something like that. So we've never had that. And then we've had the Greens, and then we've had the Democrats. And the history of Conservative parties in Australia has been that they have split. Now, the Labor Party had a big split in the 50s, but the Conservative parties, you know, we used to be free trade and protection. There's always been splits. And so even the Liberal Party is a post-war phenomenon. So I think, you know, there's been more change than most of us have appreciated in our lifetimes in Australian politics. But I don't know what's going to happen. I mean, I think it's fascinating to see. I have no idea what's going to happen in the next election, you know, because the Labor Party at this point is happy for us to succeed, but not too much. And the Liberal Party seem focused on the teals, but not on policy development or anything like that. If you read their review after the last election, it was all about we hate the teals, we must get the teals. It wasn't about we really need to think about what we did wrong.
We started off saying maybe not enough has happened in a year. I think it's probably a lot's happened for Mon in a year, and I think when we think about climate and the changes that have happened, we can be really grateful that change is happening and we are heading in the right direction, and we have a lot to thank you for. And I particularly want to just thank you for your generosity tonight and your honesty. My last couple of years when I've thought it was hard, and I think about Mon sometimes, and I think, oh, gee, she's probably not getting much sleep. At least I know you're getting breakfast.
Look, one thing I think we all learnt last year that we didn't quite appreciate was the power of community. And I don't think any of us saw it coming, what happened last year. I'd certainly never thought that Kooyong would mobilise in the way that it did at the last federal election. But it wasn't just Kooyong. You know, there's a whole lot of different electorates where that happened. And in some of them we were successful, in some we weren't. What people have to take away from that is the ability for all of us to affect change when we feel strongly about something. Right now, the thing that's keeping me awake at night is the voice. I feel really strongly about it. And I'm not proselytising here, but all of us learnt that we can affect change. You know, yes, it's not enough, the action on climate change, integrity, it's not enough. It probably will never be enough because that's human nature. But what I would ask people to do is to go out and talk to the people and, you know, have the kitchen table conversation, talk to the people, talk to 10 people, turn them, get them to stand up in Menzies or in Chisholm to force people to change, because I've learnt politicians do react to pressure. And that's what all of you can do. You did it, you've done it already, but you could do it better and in spades, and you should not forget what you did last time. Thank you.
Okay, so it's my turn to thank our speakers tonight. I mean, we're just incredibly lucky to have two great women as our elected representatives. So thank you very much to both of you for being here tonight and sharing your time with us. We have a little gift. The gift is the Great Forests book. I don't know whether any of you have seen that book by David Lindemeyer, but it is beautiful, and it's all about the forests that we need to protect.